Sarah now. Thank you, Sarah.
That's great. And thank you very much, Nancy, for fielding the housekeeping for us and keeping us on the straight and narrow with that. So I'm Sarah Scott. I'm the governance manager at Goodwill, and I'm delighted to say that we are joined today by Tim Richards Barnett, who is a senior consultant at Ignition Law. Tim specialises in compliance law support, so we're thrilled that he's with us today. Good morning, Tim.
It's very good to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, so Nancy, if you could just move us on, thank you so much. So I thought before we start, it'd be nice to put a slide on just to tell our participants today a bit about Goodwill, just in case you're new to us. So we've been around now for over 25 years, and during that period, we've helped over 2,000 businesses, and I'm really pleased to say that that's growing on a daily basis. As we've put on the slide there, we're a complete solution for companies looking to establish and grow or scale up in the UK. And we're made up of five core segments here at Goodwill. So we're corporate governance, finance, HR, payroll, and virtual office. So we give that nice all-round support to organisations. And let's move on to today. So our discussion today is going to be centred around GDPR, and we're going to add in some principles. And at the end, we'll round up with some top tips. So it's just to run through the basics, really. As Nancy said, this is our first data protection webinar, and we thought we'd launch with just running through a refresher of the nuts and bolts of it all. And then hopefully from there, we can lead on and do some more subjects going forward. Okay, Tim, GDPR, what is it and why is it so important? And I'm just wondering, Tim, as well as past that, whether you could give us some ideas of the language we can hear as well within the GDPR world.
Yeah, no, sure. So I think to kick things off, it's important just to check in that everybody understands the difference between a data controller and a data processor, which are two really key terms when we talk about when the GDPR applies. So a data controller is basically the person, whether that's a natural person or a company, that decides how and why personal data is being processed. So, for example, if you buy something from an online retailer, they will determine the data they need to collect about you and what they use it for in relation to that transaction. On the other hand, a data processor is the person that processes personal data on behalf of and in accordance with the instructions of the data controller. So, taking our online retailer, they may use a third-party payroll provider to pay their staff, and they will have a contract with that payroll provider, and they will determine what data they share with them and what the payroll provider can use that data for to obviously pay their staff. So they're doing that on behalf of and in accordance with the instructions of the retailer. Very briefly, the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, is the main piece of legislation that was enacted to try and bring consistency to the regulation of data privacy across the EU. It applies to all data controllers who are in the EU, regardless of where the data is being processed. So if they're using a processor in India, for example, a payroll provider in India that's processing personal data, notwithstanding that processing activity is outside of the EU, because the controller is based in the EU, it's still subject to the GDPR. It also applies to data controllers outside of the EU, where they're processing personal data about residents in the EU who they are offering goods or services or whose behaviour they're monitoring. The UK GDPR in its current form is essentially, there are some divergences, but it's materially the same as EU GDPR, and it applies to data controllers in the UK or those outside of the UK processing personal data about UK residents who they're offering goods or services to or whose behaviour they're monitoring. Just a couple of other quick bits on the legislation. So if you're processing personal data for marketing purposes, then you also need to think about the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regs 2003, which may mean that you, or will likely mean that you need to get the consent of the data subject that who you're marketing towards. Another thing to think about is if you're doing anything to do with children, protection of children is a huge key area. And so you need to keep in mind the age appropriate design code. The data use and access bill, this is a bit of a watch this space, but it's intended to modernise the UK's data privacy regime and to soften some of the safeguards, particularly with capitalising on AI in mind. It's a watch this space, and I understand from Sarah that we'll hopefully do a follow-up on this to tell you more about that once we know the detail of it. Why is it all important? A few quick points. I think from a personal perspective, we all like to know that third parties that are holding our data are looking after it, and we all like to have some degree of control over that personal data, and the GDPR is a really useful tool for us in that respect. We all know, we turn on the news, cyber attacks are increasingly prevalent, which again highlights the care that organizations and people need to be taking when they're handling personal data. And we'll see later that the GDPR tries to set some expectations in terms of the security measures that need to be in place. And finally, the stick, the fines. We know that the supervisory bodies are active. We know that disgruntled data subjects are willing to report issues. Non-compliances can result in big fines of up to 4% worldwide turnover, damages claims from data subjects who are impacted, and of course, the disruption cost and the reputational damage, which can be significant as well. Helpfully, the GDPR is broken down into key principles that can help us to apply it more practically, and Sarah is going to start to tell us a little bit more about that.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. And yes, as Tim's mentioned, the data use and access bill that is coming down the tracks. And as soon as we hear any more on that, we'll run another session to keep you updated. But as Tim's just said, it is very much watch this space. So Nancy, could you just move us on and we'll have a chat about the principles? Thank you. So Tim's given us that really useful overview of GDPR and has mentioned that it is broken down into key principles. So we thought what we would do is just run through the real fundamental points this morning. And let's start off with the absolute foundation stone: lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So only use the personal data in a way that complies to the law and is transparent to individuals. And let's take each one of those in turn. Lawfulness, are you using the data for a valid legal reason? Fairness, are you using the data in the way that the individual would expect you to use it in connection with that lawfulness point? And fairness is very closely aligned to transparency, and transparency is have you been absolutely crystal clear at the very start of what you're collecting and why you're collecting it and how you're going to use it. All pretty obvious points, but they're good things to keep going back to because it all hinges on the data security as well, which Tim has just mentioned to us. Moving on with the principles, purpose limitation. Oh, sorry, Nancy. That's fine. Thank you. Purpose limitation. Only use the personal data for the reasons it was collected. So again, you're being very clear as to what you're collecting and why, and you're only using it for that purpose. Don't be tempted to let it seep out into other areas of your organization for it to be used for another intention. You have to keep it ring fenced and use it for what it is there for. And then data minimization, collect and process only what you need for the job in hand. So you'll see how this keeps going back to lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. You have a purpose for what you need to collect the information for. You've been very clear with the individual as to why you need to do that, and you're only collecting exactly what you need for that. Nancy, could you move us on, please? Thank you. Accuracy. Obviously, you want to make sure that the data that you've got in your records is accurate. That's a given. But sometimes you might be in a situation where you have an individual contact you and say, oh, I'm on your list, but I've switched my email address, or if you do anything by mail, I've changed my mailing address. So first of all, obviously check that you are speaking to the person that you think you're speaking to, and it's not somebody rogue out there trying to do some kind of phishing attack and do something to alter your records. But once you've done that, make sure that you've got a system in place that you can change that information very quickly, because otherwise you could be in a situation where somebody's sent something out to a recipient and it hasn't picked up that change of email address, or it hasn't picked up that change of mailing address, postal address. And then that's not a great situation to be in either for yourself or your client. And if it has done something to cause what would be deemed as a serious data breach, it doesn't look great with the ICO. So accuracy is key. And storage limitation. It is tempting to keep data on a just in case basis. But that goes outside of the remit of the regulations, and the regulations are quite clear in that you only keep the data for as long as necessary for your business purpose. And I'll come on to this in top tips later, but keep checking on that because your business needs do change from time to time. And it may be that you might need to keep the data for longer, or you may need to actually reduce that period, but keep it on your radar because you don't want to be holding information for longer than you need to, not only because it goes outside the remit of your regulations, but it'll clog up your system. And when you do come to have to do a data cleanse exercise, it will make the job so much harder. So try and keep on top of that. Integrity and confidentiality. So as Tim's mentioned in the previous slide, cyber attacks, we're hearing about them all the time. They're in the press. Hackers are very, very sophisticated. And it is key that you keep your data secure now and checking in that you've got all the technical measures, that your colleagues who are handling the personal data, they've had the appropriate training so that they know how to handle that data. They know how to password protect or encrypt. They know to handle situations if you do get someone who contacts you to say, actually, I want to change my details and how to make sure they're maneuvering around that correctly. So it's all of those things wrapped up into that one principle. I think when the principle was set down, it was more about making sure that you've got things password protected when it gets sent out. But now we are more mindful of cybersecurity and how people can get into your system. So it's good practice as well to make sure that you've got everything locked down as much as you possibly can to keep everything secure. And Tim, that takes us to accountability. Are you able to shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, no, sure. So what GDPR isn't about is box ticking. And accountability is basically about taking your privacy obligations seriously and showing that you take them seriously. So it's about having appropriate measures, practices, policies, and procedures in place. And that will include things like your privacy notices. So this is to the transparency principle as well, but making sure that you have notices telling data subjects about the data that you collect about them and what you're going to be using it for, and the lawful basis that you have to process that data. It's also about your record of processing activities, or ROPA, a slightly painful document to put together, but super useful because you have in one place a snapshot of all your data processing activities. And is a key compliance document when it comes to the ICO or another supervisory body looking at your compliance framework. We've talked about security, but having a data security policy and practices in place, and policies and practices around data retention also key. Contracts are where you have contracts with third parties. If you're sharing data with third parties who are doing something with it on your behalf, perhaps paying your staff, then making sure that you've got appropriate contracts and data processing terms in place with those, which basically confirm that they're going to look after and deal with that data appropriately. Delivering and recording training. I heard an interesting stat yesterday that 18% of data breaches involve data sent by email. and 75% of data breaches involve some kind of human element. So it just highlights the real importance of training, delivering the training, and then making sure that you've got the records to show that you've done that. There are various touch points where risk assessments are needed under the GDPR regime. For example, if you're doing anything particularly high risk with data, if you're processing lots of special category data, which is the more sensitive types of data, if you're transferring data overseas, but making sure you've got those risk assessments completed. And then breach logs. Not all breaches are reportable. So it's recording those near misses and make sure they're properly triaged and that you're documenting the things that you've done to stop them from happening again. And that's the stuff that the regulators really like to see, because they want to know that that you're learning lessons from these sorts of incidents. The ICO has a fantastic website, lots of really helpful guidance. They've got an accountability framework, and they've got a self-assessment tool that can help to direct you to the things that you need to be doing to comply with your obligations in the accountability principle. Moving on from the principles, but just a flag. So this isn't a principle, but thinking about the international. So if we just go back one slide, sorry. The very last point here about international transfers. This is a signpost really that you just need to think about. If you're sending data across borders, then you need to be making sure that where that data is going to is being afforded the same level of protection that it would have in the UK. And there are sort of specified mechanisms to do that, which can sometimes include having certain clauses in your contract. It can sometimes be relying on a kind of country level decision where, for example, the UK government has determined that a country where the data is being sent has adequate protection, and therefore you can just rely on that. But it's just a flag as something that you need to think about. And Nancy, now we can go to the next slide.
Thank you. And thanks, Tim. Yes, the international data transfers, as Tim's mentioned, that really is a whole subject of its own. And again, that is something that we can visit in the future, but it is a really good one to flag. So that takes us to top tips. And it's just really to summarize what we've gone through here. So let's start off with good record keeping. And again, you'll see how this all tunes into accountability as well, which Tim's very helpfully gone through with us. Obviously, being in governance, I'm going to say good record keeping, always, always. But if you've got a nice, accurate record at your fingertips, so you can see how data is flowing through your organization, that is like gold. A data mapping exercise is always really good. It will help you see what information is being collected by your organization, how it's being used, things like retention periods. It's not as detailed as a ROPA, but it will give you a bird's eye view of how the data is flowing. And it's a really good compliance framework as well to analyze those risks that Tim's just mentioned in the accountability principle. The ROPA as well. Oh, sorry.
Can I just add there as well? I think with the data
Yes.
mapping, what also I find is really helpful with it is it means that you can make sure that your compliance framework is risk-based, so that you can take a kind of a more proportionate approach to designing your framework.
Oh, absolutely. It helps you sift out those red flags from the red herrings, really, doesn't it? And you've got that managed correctly. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you, Tim. And then leading on to ROPAs, Tim's mentioned ROPAs. Again, very detailed document. It will go into that very nuts and bolts of what's going on with the organization, who's the data processing, who's controlling, who's your DPO, what data you're collecting, your data subjects, if you've done things like the international data transfer that Tim's just mentioned. So it's a key document, and it is one that the ICO can ask to see if something has occurred and they want to sort of check in on things. They can ask to see the ROPA. So it is key that you've got that in super good order. And I'll pick up training and health checks as one, I think, really, because it does sort of all meld into one thing. It's good practice to have a regular health check on your GDPR compliance and how you're handling data within your organization. Even if it's just do it once a year, maybe once you've gone through your end of year period and you're starting afresh for your new financial year and you know what your corporate plan is looking like and what your business needs and how that is impacting on GDPR and personal data. Good practice to check in. So have a look at that data map that you've got prepared. Have a look at your policies, your privacy notice, your ROPA. Check in on your training. Has that been done? Has the training been recorded and has it been meaningful and current to your colleagues who are holding the data? All really good stuff to do, and it's very good practice as well because it shows your commitment to complying with data protection, the GDPR regulations, and also that absolute crucial point of keeping data secure. So I think that takes us to the end of the session. Nancy, thank you so much for helping us with the slides
No
today.
problem.
Did we have any questions from our participants today?
We haven't had any just yet. I'll give it maybe a minute or so if anybody feels like they've got a question that we can answer now for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Otherwise, if anything pops up, after the session, feel free to kind of reach out afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. We can, our contact details are on the set of slides that we have here, and those slides will be circulated. So if there is anything where somebody thinks of a question, do contact us. We're very happy to help with that. And also, if there's been anything that we've run through this morning, and you think, oh, that would be good to have a session on that or to have a discussion, feel free to contact us as well.
Yeah, Sarah, we have had a question. So
Great.
somebody has asked, can you say of any instances where UK GDPR is stricter than EU, for example?
Currently, no. I don't think there are any instances. I think in all material respects, they are the same. And I think the the rationale behind the Data Use and Access Bill is also to kind of soften the UK GDPR regime. So I think the UK's commitment to kind of supporting the development of AI and use of AI, I think will mean that if we see divergences, it's likely to be that the UK regime will soften a little bit. Although in order to because at the moment there's a decision of the EU Commission that allows for data to be transferred across to the UK because they've determined that the UK provides sufficient protection for the data. That will mean there are certain limitations on how soft the UK regime can be because they don't want to jeopardize the arrangement they've got with the EU with regard to data sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Another one's come through. Where is the best place to go to reference for the latest UK GDPR regime?
The best place to go for practical guidance on it is definitely the ICO website. And when the slides are circulated, perhaps we could include the link. But it's fantastic actually. It's one of the kind of better regulated websites with lots and lots of really good guidance. They've also got templates. They've got template ropers and different things like that. So it's a good place to go for some information.
Amazing. I don't think we've